What's the most messed up thing a family member of yours has done? One of my uncles borrowed $20,000 from my other, more successful uncle to start a business, and refuses to pay his more successful brother back because he's got so much money already. The more successful uncle refuses to sue him because that's not what family does, but they are no longer on speaking terms. I feel like if someone steals $20,000 from you, that kind of revokes their family card. I don't know. I've personally never really understood the you don't do that to family. I don't know. Family is still like people. That's probably the dumbest sentence I've ever said. Moving on. Story 2. My dad's a consummate prankster. His crowning achievement in college has since become illegal in 2 states. Step 1. He and several buddies go to a Cadillac dealership at 5 on a Friday. This was before credit cards and automatic banking, by the way. Step 2. They wrote a check for the asking price of one of the shiny new models and drove off with it. Step 3. They sell the car at a used Cadillac dealership across town. Step 4. The used dealer calls the new dealer and tells him that the car was sold with the dealer plates still on and the price tag still in the window. Step 5. New dealer figures that the check the kids wrote is going to bounce, so he calls the cops. Step 6. My dad and his friends spend the weekend in jail. Step 7. The banks open Monday morning. The check doesn't bounce. Step 8. My dad and his friends sue the dealers and the state for wrongful imprisonment and get a settlement of thousands of dollars more than the cost of the car. Basically, the plan was to seem as shady as possible and get wrongfully arrested for it. They had the lawyer set up before they even bought the car. Dad used his share to pay for his and another friend's tuition for the year. The state passed legislation protecting themselves from this kind of thing within the month, and the state to the immediate north adopted the law as well, 30 years later. This is actually kind of genius. I am a little surprised that they would sell to a kid in general, though. I guess because they actually ended up having that kind of money, they probably looked trustworthy enough. Like, they were probably well-dressed, well-groomed, that kind of stuff. And maybe the dealership figured if the check bounces, they'll still get the money somehow. So they thought, why not? Seriously though, this is kind of genius. It's definitely one of the things where people are like, we totally should have had a law about that, huh? Story 3. So I was about 2 or 3 when my dad got my mom a job with his Boilermakers union. Awesome pay, great benefits, the whole 9 yards. And my mom, well, she takes a liking to her boss. So they screw off to Europe to bang in a foreign country. And long story short, my sister was conceived in the Eiffel Tower elevator. So she comes home to be with family, but her boss is not with her. She comes home to my father, who works and supports her as she carries and births another man's baby. And then he frickin' raises this literal bastard child for 19 years. Not only does he treat her as well as he treats me, but she's the baby and she gets extra spoiled. For the record, I hold exactly none of this against her. She's a great kid and I love her so much. He takes such good care of us and helps us buy and pick and fix our first cars. He does all the labor around the farm and he's there for us through absolutely anything. So he's supporting my mom, her 2 sisters, and me and my sister. All while my mom and the oldest sister play up minor disabilities to get Social Security on top of the $3,000 plus my dad pays them each month. I say that they're minor because my mom and my one aunt have all the energy in the world when they feel like going shopping or treating themselves out to a meal. The other aunt is the middle sister. She's legally blind and so sweet. I've no idea how she came from the same place as the other 2. Meanwhile, my sister's biological father sent money every birthday and Christmas for my sister. I'm talking like $3,000 to $5,000 for her. She received none of it, even after 18. She often ended up deeply overdrawn in her lunch money account at school. Her senior year, she worked 2 jobs, and my mom and older aunt had hordes of clothing and items they bought for themselves that never came out of the box or bags, tags still on. Fast forward to this year. I was overseas this last winter/spring to be with my long-distance partner. We found an opportunity to spend more time together before he's away for several months. So I asked my dad for a loan to extend my ticket. He said yes without a second thought. Even sends me some extra to spend with my partner. Then he passed away suddenly in April, less than a week after I was supposed to come back to the US. My mom had him cremated before I even had the chance to come home. No funeral service. The VA or Legion would have given him one for free. Shortly thereafter, it comes to light that he had a pension through his union. My mother's actually prepared to fight to keep it all before she learns I am a named beneficiary. My sister is not, because it was written before she was born. My mother agrees to split the lump sum for his death in such a way that we think she's willing to share it all equally. Nope. Now she's refusing to share the lump sum, too. So now I split my checks with my sister. All this over some checks that only go until November anyway. Oh, and after cutting my sister out, my mother tried to get us to pay for half of his cremation. You know, the one I wasn't even able to be there for. Yeah, No. In addition to all of the above crap, she's also a narcissist, a gaslighter, and an all-around abuser. Her and my older aunt would often back each other in fights and power plays. Additional edit. My father was the greatest man I have ever had the pleasure of knowing. He was endlessly kind, generous, thoughtful, and caring. For a 6'4" veteran guard of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, he sure worried a lot about people stepping on these springtime kittens, and he would put up signs warning to watch your step. His best friend in his older years was a little, old, blind toy poodle. He waited on her hand and foot and spoiled her rotten until the day she died. He taught us everything from generosity to how to replace a wheel bearing in a '99 Volkswagen Jetta. Often, he would bring us extra sweet hazelnut coffee and take us out to lunch for no reason at all. Oh, and bring us little crafts from the VA whenever they had some. He wasn't honored after his death, so I appreciate anyone who reads this and remembers even one tiny thing about him. This, I feel like, is going to be the big thread winner for me. I've never been so upset at someone I haven't met before, and I play League of Legends. This level of greed I will never understand at all. Like, just what's the point? Are you trying to get a high score? Are you trying to win life or something? I just don't get it. It sounds like people in OP's biological mother's life treated her way too well. I feel like she should have gotten way more kickback for the awful things she did. Story 4. Not as bad as some of the things in this thread, but this was an absolute jerk move. I asked my uncle, who's a mechanic, if he could install new belts on my Honda since it would be much cheaper than taking it to a shop. He told me he would do it for me, I just had to buy the parts. Bought the parts, took the car to him, and came back a few hours later. He told me he was finished and I paid him $200 for a $450 job. That was awesome. A few days later, my cousin texts me a picture of some parts that his dad asked him to put on eBay. They were all the parts that he said he installed in my car. My cousin thought that they may be from me since he knew what job his dad was doing for me. I called my uncle and he denied it firmly. I still had the receipts and matched the barcodes to the ones on my receipt, so they were clearly mine. My cousin, who is also a mechanic, installed them for free for me a week later. Uncle still denies it and kept my $200. Don't talk to that jerk anymore, even at family gatherings. Story 5. My aunt married a guy a few years back. He was a pathological liar and lied about literally everything for no reason. Tried to convince everyone he was in the military black ops, and that there was no record of him because it was secret. He also did a lot of screwed up stuff like threatening our family members and friends and other stuff. He actually even tried to unalive my uncle and my 2 cousins, but he got his butt properly beat down with a baseball bat. Long story short, my aunt ended up divorcing him later because he was an all-around frickin' jerk. And he came to her house, rang the doorbell, then shot himself in the head with a handgun right on her doorstep. Real screwed up. Story 6. I had a cousin who was addicted to drugs, and his parents were always doing stuff to bail him out and keep him from being homeless. One time they put down a deposit and paid rent for a furnished apartment for him. He ended up selling the furniture for drug money. Another time they rented a mobile home for him, and couldn't figure out why the water bill was so high. Turns out he was charging his homeless friends $1 to take a bath or shower, and that was going on pretty much around the clock. Story 7. This is a tough decision. So there's my grandmother who divorced my grandfather and married his brother, making her my great aunt. Then there's the other grandmother who showed up to my grandfather's funeral drunk, dressed like a $2 escort, cussed out the family, and nearly knocked the casket over. There's 3 convicted child touchers, and then dozen non-convicted ones, because it was a different time and that kind of thing was kept in the family. There's the stepfather that tried to murder my pregnant mother. There's the cousin who shot himself in front of his kids. There's the guy who was caught banging a goat. There's the guy who would give his kids booze on fishing trips to keep them quiet. All the kids were 5 and under, by the way. And my sister, then 7 years old, tried to unalive our newborn brother because she was jealous. So take your pick on which is the most screwed up. OP really making it hard to choose which one, huh? You know how there's the whole argument over nature versus nurture for a lot of behaviors? Usually I'm on nurture, but this? I don't know. This is feeling like a nature kind of messed up thing. Story 8. Not a family member, but my sister's ex-fiance really charmed everyone in the beginning. We thought he was the sweetest southern gentleman you had ever met. Fast forward a year later, he got my sister into drugs. They lost all their money and moved in with my mom. He would abuse my sister and my mom. My mom wasn't really a hoarder, but she had a lot of things in her home. This man was a neat freak. So while my mom would be at work, he would clean out the house by throwing her belongings into the trash can outside and setting it on fire. These belongings included my late father's things that were sentimental, like his clothes. Also, any and all picture albums of our family growing up. He threw away and burned everything. I have no pictures of my dad or myself from when I was younger anymore. We had 2 dogs. One was a German Shepherd from when my dad was alive, and one a Chihuahua we adopted. He took the Chihuahua and threw her out the window on the side of the road. He let the Shepherd loose out of the house and called animal control about a stray dog. I think that hurt the worst because we had those dogs for years. My mom loved him in the beginning, so she gave him my father's wedding ring because they were going to marry. He pawned it for money. He also sold my laptop for drugs. I blamed my sister for everything for a long time. I let her borrow rent money once, but little did I know she was going to use it for drugs. She ended up leaving him, but they do have a beautiful child together. The child is the only good thing about the whole situation. He is, and always will be, a monster. Story 9. During my father-in-law's unexpected sickness and death, my brother-in-law got greedy. While my wife was staying with my father-in-law at the hospital, my brother-in-law proceeded to loot my father-in-law of as many of his earthly possessions as he could possibly load up, and took it all to his house. My wife has never been allowed to go through these personal possessions. After moving my father-in-law to hospice, to cover his tracks, my brother-in-law proceeded to tell the entire family that I had stolen large amounts of money from my father-in-law. There was no truth to this whatsoever in any shape, form, or fashion. And in fact, after my father-in-law's death, my brother-in-law embezzled the estate, $50,000 from the account. My wife ended up suing him and he had to return half. This act tore the family apart all because of greed. It's been 6 years and I still think about it every day. Story 10. I was deployed twice overseas and each time I returned home, not a single member of my family ever came to see me come back. I was the only person returning with my group that had no one there to greet me. The entire 4 years I was stateside, not a single member of my family came to visit. One of my older brothers married a girl from Samoa, and my parents flew there for their wedding. My other older brother is in the army, and my parents have traveled to attend all his major military events. I come from a very conservative Mormon/Catholic family in Wyoming, and we have generations of veterans in our family. I was the only member in my family to obtain an Eagle Scout and graduate from college. I don't know what I did to deserve this, but I finally made peace with myself after years of battling sadness mixed with anger. Now that I have my own son, I realized that what I went through was a lesson to ensure my son will never experience what I had to go through. I can't imagine coming back with a whole group of people who all have someone waiting for them and then having no one. That's really awful, OP. I don't know what happened either, but I really hope that you found family in some other way. Obviously now you have your own with a son and everything, which is amazing. But really, I'm just wishing the best for you. No one should have to go through that. Unless you did something terrible, but it doesn't sound like OP did. Story 11. My dad bought his 2 brothers a house in India to live in. Both have 2 kids, so it's a pretty big family, so a pretty big house. All he asked for in return was to leave one of the rooms open for us, so that when we go visit, we would have a room to call our own. Less than 2 months after buying them this house, they tore down the room and both took parts of it to remodel and make into their own. When my dad went to visit a year later, they wouldn't let him into the house and tried to give him $50 to go stay in a hotel. Both of these families are pretty scum. One of the kids stole my grandma's jewelry and sold it for drug money. They also collectively stole my great-uncle's pension checks and gave him nothing. They put him in a small room in the attic, even though he begged them for a bottom floor room because it was so hard for him to walk. Another son stole a visitor's wallet and then threw it into the neighbor's yard. In India, most houses have roofs that are open and connected. Cops were called and it was a huge thing, but in the end, nothing could be proved. One of the sons basically stole a store from his cousin. So the cousin's family owned this small novelty shop. The son worked there for a long time. The family that owned it went away for vacation for a week, and when they returned, all the locks were changed. Cops came and couldn't do crap because the paperwork for the shops was misfiled originally, and the family didn't technically own the deed. They couldn't afford a lawyer to fight the case. My family hasn't talked to these brothers and their families in a few years. I went to India a month ago and heard all of these stories from other family members. There is also a pending case where my dad owns a plot in India that we think the brothers' family is using to do some messed up stuff. My dad hasn't been to India in 7 years because he's just so sad to visit because of this crap. The funny thing is, my dad would have done anything for them if they didn't just screw around and steal so much. They both would be so much better off if they weren't just scum. Story 12. My cousin unalived his brother and father. He got up one morning, had a glass of milk, and I guess it was soured, because he said they were trying to poison him. He shot my uncle in his bed and then went after Robert. When the police arrived, he tried to say that Robert had unalived his father, and that he took the gun away from him and unalived him in self-defense. However, the only place on the gun they could find Robert's prints were on the end of the barrel, like he had tried to push it away. He is currently doing life without parole in the Oklahoma prison system. Story 13. Put a 70,000-pound lien against my home. Found out when his creditors came after me. When he heard they were trying to force the sale of my house, he said, "Good." That was 10 years ago. Haven't spoken since. Edit. What happened? I helped an ailing family member when he fell out badly with his much smarter business partner, and was about to lose everything himself. We're blood, right? I trusted him implicitly. I quit my job to focus on the business and moved in. He was physically in bad shape and needed looking after and all that. Because he, or according to him, his business partner, messed up his credit so bad, I had to use my own. So the business accounts were tied closely to my own, as was the company card, etc. I took no salary, just basic expenses, and gradually burned through my savings. It's okay, I thought. This is what families do. Eventually, I got myself a temp job to support us. Also, because he was getting more and more possessive over money, we were fighting. And I wanted some money I didn't have to have an argument over. Things got worse. He would show up at my work and drive me to a cash point to withdraw from the company accounts in my name. He was screwing things up for me at work because he would just barge in and demand I would go to the cash point. I liked my job and I wanted to keep it, but he made me go part-time. I also had a little money, so I moved in with my boyfriend. I was starting to realize I was in too deep and began trying to back away from the company we had set up. Cue tons of constant verbal abuse and threats. He needed me for my credit and bank accounts. As he had access to so much of my information, he was setting up other companies and trading in my name from his home computer. He got very controlling, and his favorite thing he used to call me was, "You worthless sack of crap." He wanted me out as well, and tried to have his girlfriend impersonate me at the bank, but she didn't manage it as they asked for a passport. Which he had, but we looked nothing alike. One time he threatened and scared me so much I told him to screw himself. He went absolutely mental, and he said he was coming over to unalive me. I put the phone down, ran to the toilet, and vomited. I was so scared. I got in the car and drove to McDonald's. Lay down behind the driver's seat and cried hysterically for about 2 hours. I had a motorbike at the time too. It was my pride and joy. He kept threatening to smash it up. So every night I would park it in a different place and then run home. The pressure was too much and I tried to unalive myself. Part of the problem was that we were always very close growing up. I just couldn't phone the police on him, especially as my family were encouraging me to stick with it. He needs your help. Eventually, he despised me so bad he agreed to let me go, in part because he thought he had found his dream business partner who had agreed he would take on all the risk and financial responsibility, as he was convinced this little company of ours had pots of money. So I signed everything over. There was a lot of paperwork and I still had my jaw by a thread. So I asked him to fax over whatever he needed, and he did. He became more pleasant to deal with. In retrospect, I realized he was luring me into a false sense of trust. One day he faxed a short set of terms that I needed to sign. I asked what it was, and he said it was just a formality to get me out of the affiliate relationship we had with a specific company we worked with. I signed it and thought nothing more of it. I finally got free of him but had to pay back £17,500 that he ran up on my credit cards. I knew he was never going to pay, and I was just so beat down I swallowed it. It took me 4 years to pay back. Then I began to get my life together, and married my boyfriend and moved far, far away. I didn't speak to him and my family learned not to bring him up. After my husband and I bought the house, I lost my job around the time the markets were crashing. Things were mega tough. We were barely holding our heads above water. Then, like a bolt out of the blue, I get the demand for £70,000 from a very big law firm. They say I have 7 days to pay or they will apply to the courts to get my house sold. Such was their right. I phoned them right away, and they said their client was exhausted and frustrated tracking me down as I moved and changed my name when I got married. They sent me a copy of the guarantee I had unknowingly signed and faxed to him at my temp job. He had taken a huge business loan from them, got into serious debt, drew all the money out of the limited company, and closed it. They couldn't touch him, so they came after his personal guarantor, me. After the worst few weeks of my life, I managed to get the debt set aside. I contacted the creditor directly and told them honestly what had happened and listed my assets. An old car worth £2,000 and a house teetering on negative equity. No job, and I couldn't afford a lawyer or qualify for legal aid. So I told them that they would have to see me in court knowing I couldn't pay even if they won. Eventually, they wrote the debt off, which was great, but I had already lost the years of my life and the knock-on effects were massive. Mentally, I've never been the same. Sometimes I'm tempted to get into contact, but then he does something I hear about and I realize he hasn't changed. Just one example being he tricked my mother into getting £15,000 of car finance. She had to pay it all back on minimum wage, and he never paid her back. He remains lazy and extremely manipulative, so I stay well away. This is just either a complete lack of empathy from this person or just pure evil. Because I can't imagine doing something like this for so long over an extended period of time and still telling yourself that it's okay somehow. What an absolute piece of garbage, and definitely a hugely messed up thing a family member has done. On that wonderful note, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night, and I'll see you in the next one.